Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Macon Campbell and this is maconSTUFF. So in this part we are hopefully going to get the new bellows cloth cut and prepared and get the bellows completely rebuilt. So let's jump into it. Okay, this is for the smaller exhausters, 170 centimeters by roughly 200. Okay, these are the two pieces for the exhausters. I've just cut them into a little bit more manageable pieces. Now I've got to cut the long one for the reservoir. I think my table is going to be a little bit small to comfortably work on these bellows, so I don't know what plan I'm going to make in terms of that. We'll see. Okay, so now that we've cut down all the pieces of bellows cloth into more manageable pieces, as I mentioned, my table here isn't long enough to measure out and cut the final shape of these bellows cloths. So what I'm going to do is I found a fairly long piece of MDF outside in my lumber rack, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it across here, and I'll use that as my base to work on so that I can get all my measurements and cut these cloths to shape. I'll move this out of the way a bit, remove this vise. Put it off to the side here. So I'm going to start with the smaller cloths on the exhausters first so I can get a feel for how I'm going to do this. And this is the first one I'm going to attempt. So as you can see, there are pieces of cardboard glued on the inside of here. Now this is what is called ribbing or ribs. Now the main purpose for the ribbing is to somewhat support the cloth, but mainly to train the cloth to bend in the proper way. You usually want your bellows to fold in the center. So as you can see, in a perfect world, that is how you want your bellows cloth to fold when it is in the closed position. So all this basically does is guide it so that it can bend properly. I also noticed that the larger cloth that was on the reservoir doesn't have any ribbing in it. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but I am going to try to put ribbing in all of the cloths just for the sake of being thorough. So let me pull out my first piece of cloth and I can get started on the measurements. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw out a center line, and I'll draw out the rest of my shape from there. Okay guys, so all the cloths have been calculated, drawn up and cut out. This big one for the reservoir gave me quite a bit of issues as some of my measurements were wrong. Obviously I can't erase any of my lines. All the corrections I made I added in red. I hope that's not going to cause me problems later on, but I've kind of got an idea of what's going on here. The next thing I have to do is measure and cut out all of the ribbing. Now all of these parts that I colored in over here are where I'm going to be putting ribbing in. Now, I've been struggling to find a suitable material for the ribbing. One would think that finding a fairly thick cardboard would be fairly easy, but not where I live. So what I've got in the meantime is this. This is basically corrugated board, but fairly thin, and it's a box from regular copy paper. I don't know if this is going to do the job, but I'm going to cut all of them out of this. If I do happen to find a better material, then at least I can use what I've cut out here as templates to cut out the new materials. So let's get this ribbon cut out. Okay guys, I just finished cutting the ribbing for the Bellows cloth. It's Friday afternoon now, so if I don't manage to find a suitable replacement for the ribbing that I've cut here, on Monday I'll be gluing these ribbings in place and try my very best to get these Bellows cloths installed. So I'll see you on Monday, which for you will be now. Okay, we're back. So after cutting out all the ribbing for these Bellows cloths, on Friday afternoon I mentioned to my wife what it is that I'm looking for and what I need to use it for, hoping that maybe she could come up with an idea that I hadn't thought of yet, but to no avail. So on Saturday I scoured the whole world pretty much looking for a more suitable material for the ribbing, after which I managed to find this. Now this is a thicker cardboard which is generally used in duplicate and triplicate invoice type books. Now this one measures roughly 1.2 millimeters thick, which is a smidge thinner than the material that was on the actual Bellows cloth. On Sunday my wife calls me and pulls out some cardboard from a random cupboard at home, and she produces this and says to me, "Do you think these will work?" So the whole time I was out searching for a material like this, we had a whole stack of this right at home. This material is pretty much exactly the same as this. Only difference is it is quite a bit thicker. This one measures to about 1.8 millimeters. So even more suitable for what I want to use it. So long story short, I now have more than enough material to create a better ribbing for my Bellows cloths. The only problem I have with this material is it doesn't fold well. Let me demonstrate. If I cut a piece of this cardboard, it doesn't cut very easily either. Bending this just normally, as you can see over here, you don't get a straight bend. So what you need to do is score it. This works pretty well as a scorer. It's a wooden karambit I made more than a year ago. Create a scoring line which will give you a nice clean fold, but the only problem then is as soon as you fold it, you can see the cardboard tears. So the next solution I came up with was to use some bookbinding tape. Chop a piece off here, stick it down there. Do another score, and now when you fold it over, you get a nice fold. This is the method I'm going to use for all of the ribbing. So I'm first going to take these ones that I made, use them as templates, draw out the shapes on my new material, cut them out, and then score them down the middle, reinforce them with the bookbinding tape, give them a bit of a fold, and then they're ready to be glued onto the actual bellows cloth. So let's do it. So it seems this rotary cutter is having a bit of difficulty getting through this cardboard, but I found that a normal box cutter blade is doing a much better job. Okay, before I move on, there are just a couple of adjustments I want to make to the ribbing on the reservoir cloths in these corners specifically. To explain, let me show you on the actual bellows. So this is the reservoir on this side, the exhausters are on that side. This will open and close like this. As you can see, there are two wooden blocks on this side and also on the other side. This, I'm guessing, is mainly as support because this is where the spring gets inserted. And the hole over here is the block of wood that keeps it in place, that gets screwed in there. So I've got ribbing on this side and ribbing on that side. So what I want to do is just create a cutout on the ribbing so that it doesn't interfere with these blocks over here. So I'm just going to measure these blocks and transfer the marks onto the cloth and then adjust the ribbing accordingly. Okay, so these are the corners that need to be cut out. Bear in mind that these are not the actual measurements. I'm adding a bit extra just to be safe. This part over here is 50 millimeters. This part running down the side is 110 millimeters. And the width is actually just over 10 millimeters, but I'm going to make it 15 millimeters just to be safe. I'm not worried about this being terribly square, I'm just eyeballing it. Remembering obviously to work off of my red lines, which are my corrections, which I'm constantly forgetting to do. So now if I lay this down here, I can get the marks where I need to cut them away. Okay, so these corners I'll cut out. So I'm going to do the same on the other side. We should be ready to move on. Okay, I got my corners cut out. Let's move on. Okay, now I'm just going to mark out these center lines so that I know where to score them when I want to make the bend. Okay, now that I have all my center lines drawn in, I can score them, flip them around, put some of the bookbinding tape over the back, pry it over slightly just to set that initial bend, and then they should be ready for glue up. Okay, so all the ribbing is cut and looking pretty good if I do say so myself. Next order of business is gluing these in place. So everything seems to be going wrong today. In fact, I just took 10 to 15 minutes trying to explain it all, and my camera decided to die halfway through, corrupting the file. So I have absolutely no footage of that. So I'm going to do my best to recap what I just said and just hope it all makes sense. So what I was planning on starting today was the hinges for the bellows. So there are 3 hinges that need to be made. There needs to be a long hinge along the back here for the reservoir, as well as 2 smaller hinges that need to go here for the exhausters. Now, I mentioned in the last video that I was contemplating using leather for the hinges. I was also thinking of using a nylon strapping. I was thinking of using bookbinding tape along with piano hinges. But all of these options boil down to one question: is it going to be strong enough? Now, the glue that I've been using throughout this project is old brown glue, which is basically a substitute for hot hide glue, but it is ready to use. So far, for all of the things that I've used it seems to be working perfectly fine, but I started noticing some issues with the bond between the ribbing and the substitute bellows cloth that I'm using. Now, I'm sure if I had proper bellows cloth, it might not have been a problem, because from what I can tell is everyone seems to be using hot hide glue to glue their bellows in place. Now, these are one of the bellows cloths that I just finished gluing up yesterday, and from what I can tell, it doesn't seem to be sticking as well as it should. If I just pull on it a little bit, it seems to be coming loose fairly easily. So that kind of made me start to question the effectiveness of this glue. And I'm starting to worry that this material isn't going to bond properly to the wood on the bellows. So I did a couple of tests in my last take, which I obviously have no footage of now. But basically I tried different kinds of material. This was the nylon strapping. This is the cloth I'm using for the bellows. So is this. And this is the leather that I used for the mutes a couple of parts back. Now, these 2 were materials that I was thinking of using for the hinges on the bellows. I tested both of these with hide glue. This one failed miserably, but the leather seemed to create quite a good bond. These 2 pieces of cloth I tested with the hide glue as well as contact adhesive. The hide glue doesn't seem to bond to this at all, whereas the contact adhesive did a very good job of bonding the material to the wood. I also, just for interest's sake, did a test of wood on wood using the hide glue, which I'm going to test now. Okay, thankfully that seems to be a very strong bond. So obviously there is not a problem with the glue, there is a problem with the materials that I'm using. Now, just to clarify, I have done quite a lot of research while restoring this organ, and I know that a lot of the things that I'm doing are wrong. The materials I'm using are wrong. The supplies that I'm using are wrong. But the fact of the matter is, if I had to order all of the parts and materials and supplies that I needed for this organ, it would just cost me a ridiculous amount of money. Even though I've sourced most of the stuff I needed for this project locally, I've still spent quite a considerable amount of money on this organ so far. So in quite a few of the blogs that I've read, most professionals say with exclamation marks, do not use contact adhesive. But as it stands, that is the only thing that is going to create a strong enough bond for my bellows cloth. So I'm totally going to go against what is considered to be the right way of doing this, and I'm just going to try and MacGyver this until it works. Another problem that I'm having is that this ribbing with the bookbinding tape on it seems to be a little bit too difficult to fold. Thankfully, the mechanism seems to be working fine. As you see, if I fold it over, it creates a nice fold over here, but it's very hard to fold over. Now, possibly if I just put them in as is, over time they will loosen up, but what I think I'm going to do is take a sharp knife and try to cut an opening in this bookbinding tape, and hopefully that will allow this to fold a lot easier. Now, if at any point any of these start to come loose, which some of them seem to be already, I'm just going to re-glue them with this contact adhesive, as I already know now that this hide glue doesn't seem to create a very good bond on this material. So if all else fails, my final resort is going to be to replace these bellows cloths with leather. Leather is something, thankfully, that is very easy to find in this country. All shapes and sizes and all different kinds of animals you can think of. For a piece this long, I'm probably going to need a piece of giraffe, but I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So let's move along. Okay guys, I apologize. I know you guys are probably sick and tired of listening to my voice, but I feel it's important for me to explain what it is that I'm doing. Now yesterday I went and scratched this out of the bin, which is the old material that was used for the hinges on the Bellows. Upon inspection and a little bit of research, I realized that this, which is called strapping or webbing, comes in many different kinds of materials. The one that I bought, which I'm going to be using for the straps on the treadles, is a nylon webbing, and this seems to be a cotton webbing. Now, being that hide glue is a natural glue, that might be why I'm having issues with these materials, as most of these materials are synthetic. That could be the reason why I'm not getting a good bond. So I set out yesterday to see if I could find cotton webbing instead of the nylon that I wanted to use, and thankfully I did find this, which is cotton webbing, pretty much the same thickness as this one. It is a bit wider, but I suppose I can just cut it to whatever size I need. So yesterday off camera I decided to do a couple more tests. Here they are. So this I glued onto the side here with the hide glue. This one I did the same, just to test kind of the hinge that I'm going for. Now, if this material works well with the hide glue, what I'm going to do is create a double hinge for all of them. So I'm going to put material on the outside, and I'm also going to put material on the inside, and that should give me a much stronger hinge. Let the testing commence. So this one I'm going to apply some sideways pressure to see how strong it is. That doesn't look good at all. Seems to have come off with very little effort. That seems to be a problem. So let me give this one a try. Now obviously if I'm just opening and closing it, it seems to be working okay, but as soon as I add some force, I don't know, I'm still kind of on the fence about this. The hide glue on this one still seemed to be quite strong. And if I use the double hinge system, that might still be a strong enough bond. So I may or may not do a couple more tests, and I may or may not decide to use the contact adhesive instead of the hide glue. But that's enough explanation for now. I'm just going to get to it. Okay, so what I'm going to try and do here is glue the inside hinge first. Turn this over like this, and this is where the hinge needs to go. So I'm going to clamp this up, lift it upright so that I have a flat surface to work on. I'm going to glue my hinge in place. I will probably secure it with a couple of tacks. Once that is dried, turn it back and glue on another piece of material on the outside. So let's do it. Okay, so the hinge on the inside, I used the hide glue, and that hinge wasn't doing too well. So I knocked in a couple of tacks, and that kind of kept it in place a little bit better, but not nearly as well as I'd hoped. So this hinge on the outside, I used the contact adhesive, and I've left this one for about 2 hours now, and I'm really hoping that this one is going to do a bit better, because otherwise I'm going to have to redo it. I'm not too worried about the inside hinge because I think most of the strength is going to be provided by this outside hinge. So we take these bricks off and see how it looks. Okay, from what I can tell, it looks like it's doing a whole lot better. So it seems I don't have much of a choice. I'm just going to have to use the contact adhesive. This one is close to done already, so I'm going to have to go out and get some more, so I can glue up the other 2 hinges and finally get around to reinstalling the bellows cloths. Okay guys, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to call it for this week. I was really hoping to have the bellows fully rebuilt in this part, but as luck would have it, it just didn't turn out that way. I ran into so many issues which I probably could have prevented had I just bought all the proper materials. But at least we've gotten all the bellows cloths cut out, we've got the ribbings glued in place, and we've pretty much got all the hinges glued in place. Sometime over the weekend, as soon as this hinge has gotten time to dry, I will go ahead and glue in the inner part of the hinge off camera. So next week hopefully we can just get right into gluing the bellows cloths back in place, as well as cutting and installing all the valves needed for the bellows. So if I can give you one piece of advice, don't do it the way I'm doing it. Do yourself a favor, get the proper materials, get the proper supplies, get the proper glue, and this process will just be that much easier. Obviously the process and the procedure is going to be virtually the same no matter what materials you're using, but having the right stuff is just going to save you a whole lot of headaches. So with that being said, once again, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, like, comment, subscribe, share. If you have any remarks or advice, which I'm pretty sure some of you will, drop them down in the comments below. I am a first-time organ restorer, so I'll take all the advice I can get. So I guess you're gonna have to wait till next week to see the rest of these bellows come together. I have a feeling that gluing the bellows cloths in place is gonna be a very challenging process, so wish me luck. So let me get back to the office and finish editing this video, and till next time, keep making stuff.